Thank you, Nabil, and thank you everyone for joining us. I am equally as excited about this conversation. Ryan, I know you are an incredibly busy man, especially with the remarkable growth and rise of DoorDash, which we're excited to jump into today. So thank you to everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Ryan, for joining. Maybe to kick off this conversation, I think it would be great, especially with such a developer-centric audience here. Oftentimes the path towards engineering leadership isn't as kind of clear cut for everyone of pursuing more of an individual contributor path versus a management. What made you kind of want to veer towards the direction of managing teams versus continuing down the individual path?
Thanks, Dylan. Yeah, no problem. I'll get into that in a second. Thank you, Nabil, as well. And thanks to Terminal for putting this on. Bienvenidos, amigos y amigas. Gracias por venir hoy. I was an IC. I was an individual contributor, and I ended up, switching into a role of managing my former peer group at Voxer. That happened. It was serendipitous. As a company, you sort of grow, things change, and all of a sudden we needed a new leader. And I had a chance, and I was being pushed by my peer group to take the helm. I was resistant, probably for a good reason. In the end, I took the job, and I sucked at it by my own measure. I was not very good at it. I did it for a year, and I wasn't good at it because I didn't bring the appropriate structure to it. I was still an individual contributor. I was still stuck in the weeds. I was still concerned with scale and things like that. And I needed to focus on being a manager in order to be good at it. So after about a year of getting some feedback from some of my directs, I actually gave the role to one of them, and they took the job for a year. I went back to being an IC. I felt this weight lift that I felt very happy, and I kind of crushed it as an IC again. In the end, that person ended up leaving and going on to work at Apple, and we had a choice to make. Ryan, do you want to go back into this role now and treat it seriously, or do you want to hire somebody else? So I took the role again, and I treated it more seriously. He had brought structure to the role, made it a lot easier for me. Interestingly enough, that person works here today for me on my team. He runs infrastructure. So after 5 years at Apple, I ended up reuniting with him here. His name's Matan Amir. So things just work out oddly all the time. But it was I think I was goaded into it. I think people forced me into it or pushed me into it because they didn't want somebody else in the role. And that was a weird way to enter. But again, wouldn't change any of these things because I learned a ton along the way.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing. And you've been a part of a number of different tech companies now throughout your career. How do you think about creating a strong engineering culture? And can you describe DoorDash's engineering culture today?
Our co-founder and our CEO says this one thing all the time: culture is 80% of who you are and 20% of what you want to be, which is probably a quote from some book that he's read because he has a wicked memory. But I think that's true, and we've changed over time, and culture changes slowly, way slower than you would like. You can't just magically make culture change. So where we were when I got here, we were about 250 engineers. We were all about shipping software as absolutely fast as we possibly could, right? Not a ton of rigor, but a ton of business impact being realized from that software being shipped. And it was chaotic. We had a production engineering team, which is basically like an infrastructure layer that was on the hook for almost every single deploy, failing and always having to roll things back in consistent and constant firefighting mode. And they were done. They were spent. Then you have these engineers up top that really never got a chance to perfect their craft or build anything for the long term. So they were frustrated as well. So everybody's kind of frustrated, but we fixed that. We rectified that right away. Where we are today, we're a culture that values three things, and we're trying to still, push more towards all these things, and we measure this with objectives and key results, OKRs, if you're familiar with Google parlance. So we have three objectives as an engineering team, and these sort of drive us culturally. We have an objective around quality, right? The resilience, the repeatability, the reliability of all of our systems. So effectively, this is craftsmanship. We value craftsmanship, and we invest in it on a quarterly basis. We value velocity, and this is where we want to go. We're not as fast as I would like. I don't think any company is ever as fast as you would like it to be, but we value velocity, and velocity is direction and speed. It's not just speed. So we've changed to valuing velocity, and the way we do that is we invest heavily in developer productivity tooling. We invest in release tooling. We invest in experimentation and things like that. Streamlining to use the same stack across the entirety of the organization brings more velocity and time. It doesn't bring anything immediately. And then the last thing that we really value culturally is the integrity of the data at rest. our financial data, basically just making sure that our customers can trust us with their data, and the street and our shareholders can trust us with the data as well. So it's those three things that we value. We're a culture that's light on rules. We try to create frameworks rather than process so that it's easier to do the right thing than not. We're not always perfect there. And then lastly, we're a culture that really values transparency. And in order to get true transparency, people have to be able to talk openly about failure. So we're blameless as much as we possibly can. Very retrospective, always looking back to try to learn from that failure and be transparent about it. But we're never there to blame the individual. There's always something in the frameworks that were broken that we need to create, need to fix. So we try to share that as openly as possible. And as long as we can keep that up, I think that that's a good recipe for success in the long.
Awesome. I love those objectives, and maybe dovetailing off that, curious, what are some of the unique technical challenges that the team is facing today? And can you share a little bit of what type of technologies the team is using in your current development stack?
Yeah, thanks for the question, man. The thing about working for this company is it maps the physical world. And mapping the physical world is very, very difficult. So there's a ton of challenges around that. If you think of what the average DoorDash transaction is, it's probably like a 30 to 45-minute thing where people have ordered food. They're hangry. Maybe they have to feed their whole family. It could be a stressed out mother. It could be some bachelor that needs to get out. It could be anything, but they want that product to be delivered, and they've come to expect it 100% of the time, which is not an unreasonable expectation. But everything that goes into that, take, for example, just predicting how long it's going to take when they're just, scrolling through with not a care in the world, how long it's going to take for them to get that food. It's one of the hardest predictions to make in all of tech, because you have to map, the physical transport of that food. You have to map the preparation of that. You have to map parking. You have to map Dasher understanding. How are they going to even understand the landscape on both sides? There's a handoff. So it's a really difficult thing to do. That's just one thing as part of our logistics, network that is super exciting. Another thing is we're in a transitionary phase of the company. We're really good at food delivery, specifically in the US, Canada, Australia. But we're trying to be much more. We're trying to be the app for absolutely everything. And we're transitioning into a world now in convenience and grocery stores where there's hundreds of thousands of items that are not categorized canonically, as they are in a menu. So we're getting into this SKU-based world. So our search problems are as real as any other place in the world. And it's a super, interesting set of things to work on as we try to move through that. In terms of the tech stack, we did work pretty hard to consolidate, and we're almost done. So when I got here, we were on a Python monolith, Django, if any of you are familiar with that in the audience. And there's many companies that can run on monoliths. I don't have that expertise, so we decided to go a different route. We're a microservices-based company. We have about 100 microservices across 1,000 engineers. The vast majority of them, about 99% of them, are written in Kotlin. We chose Kotlin, or my engineers chose Kotlin. I didn't. Because it was a bridge between the world of Python and Java and where we wanted to be. So we chose that, and we've got to create a big piece of our developer stack around that. So we're kind of leading the charge there. You get to do it on the front end Android, and you get to do it on the back and everything like that. So Kotlin, we use Cassandra and a database called CRDB, CockroachDB. We use all gRPC for transport, and then a lot of Kafka for the async stuff. So a lot of things that begin with a K sound.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And maybe continuing down a bit of the technical track, since we're on the topic, can you maybe walk through, is there a standard development process that your team follows for a new feature? Is that being product-led, business-led, design-led, engineering-led? What does the team look like that develops that? And can you walk us through the development process?
We're pretty good at planning. On a quarterly basis, we plan what we want to do, and we do that pretty bottoms up, right? So we're an operations heavy business, not like system operations, but people. There's a lot of people out in this physical world that have to do different things, calling on restaurants, calling on Dashers, acquiring them, working through the nuances and subtleties of the problems. And we have a ton of folks. We also have a ton of folks in support. We run our own support in-house, and we have, external help as well. But those folks have a lot of the requirements. So they sort of come up through the operations team. So it's a four-pronged approach. It's product, design, eng, and ops that sort of decide what we're going to do. So we have three different operating cadences in engineering as well. We have a pure product cadence, which basically means we plan for the quarter, we execute sprint by sprint, 2 weeks at a time, we release features on time and try to be satisfied. But we're not afraid to blow everything up in the middle of a quarter if we have to. If the business demands have changed, if the competition has changed, if policy has changed, we're not afraid to sort of like throw a roadmap away in service of the greater goal, in service of the customer. There's a second operating cadence, which is more of an engineering or a product platform cadence, which is folks that are creating software for other engineers. So if you think of our search and discovery, ranking, our shopping cart, all the ordering experience, all that kind of stuff falls into a platform. If you think of things like payments, that falls into a platform cadence where everybody's taking advantage of it. Mapping is another one. And then our logistics platform, everyone sort of needs that at a logistics company to function. So we plan again quarterly there. There's a lot of product involvement in what we're going to build, but we don't really blow those roadmaps up. The reason is there's so many people in the company that are dependent on that we can't just shift. And then the last cadence is more of the infrastructure type cadence, where we're planning 6 months at a time. Our goals are bigger. They don't necessarily fit into sprints or quarters, but we still release with milestones, every couple of weeks, and we track it that way. Those we impact even less if we can, right? Sometimes, 20% of it gets all blown up in any quarter, but that's kind of how we operate. So in that first one that I talked about, which is probably about half the engineers at the company, we plan sprint for sprint. We build sprint for sprint. We release constantly, every single backend service every day. We release our mobile software on a weekly basis, every single week, like clockwork. If we have to fix things, we will. And on the web, we're releasing every day as well.
Fascinating. And you've been in the development space for quite a long time. There's been a lot of big changes. You mentioned moving from kind of a monolithic code base to more microservices. Are there any other big changes or innovations that you've seen in the developer landscape of tools? And is there a way that new technologies or tools get adopted at DoorDash? Can developers bring in tools themselves, or do you kind of decide and determine to make sure there's standardization across the tools that are being utilized?
Yeah, we're a company that's fortunate enough to, get to take advantage of a ton of advancements in open source. Right? So I talked about things like Kafka or Cassandra or CockroachDB or any of these things. Like these are massive undertakings that if we tried to build ourselves, if we had that sort of built here syndrome, we'd be in a lot of trouble. So we try to be really good at what we're good at, right? We want to be really good at serving our customers. We want to be really good about making sure our merchants have everything they need. We want to make sure excellent menu tooling, excellent discovery experiences. We want to make sure basket sizes are up, our dashers are satisfied and happy and paid well. But I'm not into creating databases or into creating protocols or anything like that. So we're on Amazon, and we're happy with them as a vendor. And but we tend to move towards open source products because cloud agnostic is a good space to be in the long run. And on the front end, like we use this stuff has evolved so much. We use pretty vanilla Android, right? And we use pretty vanilla. We just recently upgraded to Swift UI, and then we use React, and we're using GraphQL now on the web. So again, standards that are out there. I find that there's always things and always ways you can go experiment and expand, but as an organization of 1,000, it's tough to sort of like roll something new out. So we like to take advantage of and standing on the shoulders of giants and use the stuff that's out there when we possibly can.
Makes a lot of sense. And transitioning to think about growing the engineering team, you mentioned at the top that you have obviously a large team in the US, you have a growing team in Canada, Japan, you're looking at Latin America now. Why is these markets so critical to fuel the next phase of growth for a company like DoorDash?
Yeah. And you noticed in the beginning, I said distributed teams. We're not having a remote culture, but we do have distributed teams. And we try to coalesce folks into time zones. It's really important that people can convene. And COVID has taught us a lot about what we're capable of, as it's taught many companies, right? So for 18 months, I haven't seen most of the engineers on my team in person. It's been this type of experience. But it also means it opened up a ton of geographies, specifically geographies that go north and south around the United States. So really excited to get down into somewhere like Mexico, which is time zone friendly to our East Coast teams specifically, and excited to really take advantage and tap the top tier of engineers in those countries. In the Bay, it's tough. Like that's where we used to do all of our hiring. And the Bay is very, very competitive. People are less loyal. So I really think there's a competitive advantage for keeping people at this company 5-6 years at a time. If you look at a company like Facebook, they're really good at retaining engineers, and they celebrate the 10-year anniversary. That's the thing that they care about, and nothing until there counts. So I want to get engineers where they're at, thinking that it's going to help. If I can provide them the right tools, that they'll stay loyal and they'll want to retain with the company, and we will have a significant competitive advantage because of it. In Mexico specifically, we have plans to eventually get ourselves down there, and I think that it's really important to have engineers in region in order to understand the nuances of a city and what culturally the app needs. And that's why we put engineers in Japan. That's why we put engineers in Australia, et cetera. So I'm not signaling anything. I'm just saying that eventually, if you look at us compared to a company like Amazon, which you've probably ordered from, we're about 8 years into an Amazon. Hopefully 10, 15 years from now, we'll expand very intentionally and people will understand the value of the DoorDash name all around the world.
Absolutely. And thinking about it from an engineer's perspective, what do you look for when you're hiring for your team or you're hiring for an individual contributor? Are there certain backgrounds, experiences, skill sets, cultural alignment that you want to see out of an engineer getting hired at DoorDash, regardless of the team?
Yeah, it just kind of depends where you are in your arc. In the end, I want a technologist. I want somebody that likes to write software, right? Somebody that really enjoys writing software, writing quality software, writing software that meets customer need and not just like science experiments. So that's super important for us. If you're just out of school, if you're a couple years out, then I don't need you to necessarily know about scale, but I need you to have a curiosity that really cares about learning about scale, right? Somebody that looks beyond the boundaries of their existing team and really understands the inputs and outputs of what they do. Very business minded, very business focused. We're really trying to move things forward for the business. So that's an essential piece. As you get up in your skill set, right? If you've been around for 10 years, or longer, then I'm hoping you've seen some scale. I'm hoping you can make the right trade-offs, because in the end, again, if we're light on rules, your hands are on that keyboard and you and your code reviewer are going to make a call that could, really change, what we're capable of. And I need people that understand scale. Even though we're building things and experimenting, if we build them right the first time, then we save ourselves a ton of cycles and we're much more efficient as a company. Lastly, I think I like people that want to invest in tools, specifically for other engineers to make them more productive. And people that have shown that or are interested in that, that's really where you provide the leverage as a single engineer. There's many people in time that can create a feature, but there's very few that can get out there and really create tools for leverage for an entire team. So that's some of what I'm looking for. And good people, we're having no jerks policy. We want good people that will go out of their way, specifically in this virtual environment, to be good teammates, good code reviewers, people that are capable of leading, through influence and design and things like that. So yeah, you need to be a good person to make that happen.
And if someone is maybe still very early in their journey as an engineer, what advice would you give to someone earlier in their career who aspires to be a leader like yourself or aspires to join a fast-moving, fast-growing company like DoorDash? Are there any types of work experiences, skills, projects, technologies that you think are going to be very impactful over the next 5 to 10 years that you would invest in if you were back earlier in your career today?
Yeah. Well, the easiest one is become an Android engineer because there's several billion of those in the world and billion devices, and there's not a billion Android engineers. So if I had one simple recipe for being gainfully employed for the next decade at least, it's to become an Android engineer. Absent that, I think it's important that you go as wide as you possibly can when you're early in your career. I would recommend staying at a company for a while as long as you like the leadership and you like where the company's going, but switching jobs or switching tech stacks maybe every 18 months, really challenging yourself to kind of start all over. And the reason I say that is because my experience at Voxer really forced me to do that. Again, 6 languages, front end, back end, scale, the web. I did everything. I learned release tooling, and I was forced to. And if I look back at that breadth now, and because as soon as you become a manager, your skills atrophy. So you only have the accumulated set of what you've learned to that point in time. And because I got to touch all that stuff, I never really became an expert in much of it, but I can empathize with people. I can relate to them. I can speak their language. in ways that helps me recruit, in ways that helps me align, and in ways that allows, I think, the team to thrive. So I'd say it's really important to go as wide as you possibly can. Here at DoorDash, we have a policy that says you need to become a staff engineer before you can transition over to the management path. And it's a lateral move. You move horizontally, you don't move up. It's not a promotion to manager. But the reason we do that is there's a combination of life experience and hopefully that scale that you've seen at that point, and then breadth, because you can't get it after the fact. It's really odd if you go into a managership and then back, right? So you can't get that. And then maybe one more point, the people that I've admired the most, the people that have always been able to really work themselves into organizations effectively are those that actually go in and out of management. So when they switch companies, they come back in as an individual contributor and they learn the ropes and they do it for 2 years. And then they become a manager at that company again, one level up from where they were previously. And then they go back into being an IC. I don't have that courage at this point. I haven't coded anything in about 7 years, but those people always thrive. So, if you have that opportunity and somebody wants to hire you for some startup but you got to be an IC, but you believe in the team, go for it. I think you'll be a better leader and a better engineer. I'll tell you, you're really easy to manage if you've been a manager before. I wish everyone was a manager for their first year of their career and then an IC, because it would be a lot easier for everything.
That is amazing nuggets of advice, and thank you so much for sharing those. That wraps it up with a lot of the questions that I had for you, Ryan, and thank you so much again. Just know you're incredibly busy, but thank you for sharing the time, the knowledge, the insight, and such a remarkable and exciting time for DoorDash. We do have a few questions that have come in, so I'll take those next. And if anyone has additional questions for Ryan, please make sure you put them in our chat on our live stream page, and we will try to get to them. The first question is from Alonzo. So Alonzo asks, when there are changes to code, how long does it take for it to go live? And the second part of the question is, let's say a customer finds a bug in your product. Once the fix to the code is sent, how long does it take that fix to be seen by a customer? So from code to test to production.
Great. Alonzo, thank you for the question. I think in the best circumstances, we can do that in a matter of hours, right? Depending on how crucial the fix is, if it's really debilitating our Dasher force or it's preventing people from ordering, we have the ability to write software, review it, and ship it, even to the mobile side within a couple hours, which is pretty good. On the normal case, like if you're working on some stuff, code review can take 4 hours, 5 hours. It's kind of unfortunately a who you know. Right now, we're actually working actively on improving code review. We've worked it into our the metrics that we value as an organization to make sure that code review, which is a great teaching tool and it's a great productivity tool, we've worked that in. And goal would be, to get that down to just a couple hours so that you can do something, have it reviewed. Once it's in there, we have a continuous integration pipeline running, so everything kind of gets rolled in. Tests get run. You want to do it right. It's probably going to take you at least a day or two to write tests and do it right, So always striving to be better there. We're not as good as I'd like to be. That's part of that velocity story. So I think we're okay. I'd give us like a C+.
Well, thank you, Alonzo, for the question. And another one quickly, as we have some more questions coming in, but what is the hardest part for you for remote work and remote management? And what is the most enjoyable part?
The hardest part is the lack of feedback. If you're a perceptive person, which most leaders are, it's very difficult to be perceptive over Zoom. All you can see is their eyes. You have no idea what's going on otherwise. And tracking that, and if you're sort of feedback driven in real time and you're emotive and all that kind of stuff, it's very challenging, right? So I'd say just as a leader, selfishly, it's much easier for me to lead in person. And while the pandemic has waned a few times here, we've been able to get the team together. We're in the midst of Delta again, so the team is not together. But those times have been very nourishing. I think very, very good for the camaraderie and morale. That said, I've hired over half of the engineers at this company in these 18 months, and they've never met each other, and somehow they're thriving. I think the other part that's really hard is figuring out how to compartmentalize. So the bookends of a day, the commuting time, while commuting is miserable, I don't like commuting, it really defined the day for me, and I think it does for many people. So getting onto the train in the morning and cramming myself in there and hating it was the beginning of the day. I could begin to check my email, and ahead of that, I would do the things I needed to do at home, drop my kids off at school, etc. That's gone. And then coming home, when I'm done with this day, I walk out of my bedroom into the living room and like the day's supposedly over, but it's not. Like it morphs in between. So it is a challenge. I think humans are not designed to function this way yet. We have to evolve. Evolution, like culture, takes a long time. I think we are slowly evolving to try to find that space in there. But I would say that the execution has not suffered. People have done a great job, and I commend every one of them that have done that. Um, it's a little transactional where I'm doing it because I'm supposed to. I'm not doing it on behalf of you or for you, which I wish we were doing more of. I think that those personal relationships and sort of lead you to feel more fulfilled rather than just sort of like checking off the task that's before you. But we're adapting and we're doing okay.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question. This one comes from Juan. Juan, thank you for the question. Of all the LATAM countries, why did you choose to start with Mexico?
Proximity. It's right there. I think there's a huge talent pool that's still very undertapped, a great university system. And again, if we can get the top 10% in any country, great. But if we can get one that's close, time zone friendly, where we can fly down and meet people and get them fired up when this pandemic ends, like I think that is really where we're looking to go. And excited to partner with Terminal to take away all the complexity of hiring a large team at scale in the beginning. So yeah, Mexico. I love Mexico, the country, but that's not why we chose it. We chose it because the data told us to. I've probably been to Mexico 20 times, mostly resort towns, but most recently CDMX, which I love, and I'm going back there again next spring break, really. So
awesome. Another question. This one comes from Kieran. Thank you for the question. Across 1,000 engineers, there's obviously a lot going on. How do you decide when you need to dive into the weeds versus leaving it to the team?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kieran. We have a value there, a cultural value that sort of resonates with me. It's the ability to operate at the lowest level of detail, and I think knowing when to pull that is super important. Most of my in-depth interaction will be around reliability. So if a code yellow, if you're familiar with what a code yellow is, audience, it's when things are going wrong and you need to stop feature development. If a code yellow needs to get called, I'll dig in very deeply. In fact, we called a code yellow org-wide for 1 month, the month of July, because there was a bunch of tech debt that had built up and engineers didn't have the space or time to necessarily adopt some of the new frameworks that we had in place. So we ended up calling a code yellow and reduced our product velocity significantly to catch up. And that's something I had to be very leaned into, right? I have to be knowledgeable enough to make the decision, which is a hard one, to slow everything down temporarily. And then I have to be knowledgeable enough that I can evangelize. I can tell people about, the whys and repeat that over and over and over again. And then there are just specific parts that I'm interested in, right? Trying to figure out how to do contextual search in a retail environment that works across our global stack as well. It's an interesting problem. So I dig into that one every once in a while. There's things around releasing software that I care about. Developer productivity I care about a lot. So I try to stay close to that to see where those wins are going to come. And then database scale is another thing that I try to stay close with the team on. But the organization and the problem space tends to take me where it wants to take me. And I follow wherever it needs to go.
Awesome. Another one here, I think anonymous questioner. How intercommunicated are the teams at DoorDash? For example, if I need help from someone on another team, can I just ping them, or do I ask for help or ask globally who can help with this? How do you kind of manage, I guess, communication pathways across teams for such a large organization?
Yeah, so Slack thankfully exists, and another giant that we get to stand on the shoulders of. Each team has a help channel that's out there, and most recently we've just invested in sort of our help infrastructure, really trying to make it such. Usually, the on-call engineer for the week or for the period of time will be the person that answers your incoming messages. But certain teams, it's too much for one on-call engineer. So we created this help bot that's now categorizing everything for us in Jira so that we can get back to it in a timely fashion. It'll self-answer some of the questions that you may have that have been repeated, et cetera. But it's not as easy as it needs to be. Again, if I'm giving us a grade, B minus, C plus, we're working on it. I find it the job of every engineer to try to make that better. The thing I love most about that helpfulness initiative that we embarked on, it was totally eng-led. It came out of an AMA and Ask Me Anything with a team that we host every 2 weeks. A team of engineers volunteered to make it happen. We're piloting it with 6 teams right now. We have 29 waiting to go. It's this big orchestration between Slack, our IT teams, and our engineers. So yeah, it's open. You have access to all 1,000 engineers, but obviously you got to ping people in a reasonable way to get a hold of them. And we're trying to do our best to, again, componentize it, to create frameworks so that people don't feel like they're interrupting, but they're getting the help that they need.
Awesome. Well, we're going to wrap that up with questions. Thank you, everyone who submitted those. And for any unanswered, we'll try to get back to you as well. But thanks again, Ryan. Really appreciate it. Behalf of everyone at Terminal, we're thrilled to partner with you and help grow the team in Mexico and further in Latin America. So I'm so excited for this next phase of your growth here. And without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Nabil to help us wrap up. But thank you again, Ryan.
Thank you for your time. And thank you to everybody for showing up and listening. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. And for anybody who was unable to join us today, we will definitely send a copy of the recording over to you. And next month, we have another great program coming up. It's entitled How to Sell Your Company to Bill Gates. So we'll be sharing some more details on that program in the coming days. And thanks so much, Ryan and Dylan, for your time today, and everyone for the questions. Ciao for now.